This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 25 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Discussions at the Roundtable. I'm your host, Noah Ballmer, and today I'm excited to welcome James Lewis to the show. Now, Mr. Lewis owns Total Transportation Training, LLC, and Valley Automotive Consulting, LLC. He's a published author, public presenter, and sought-after expert witness with over 12,000 written opinions and 800 trials. Mr. Lewis holds a master's in education from the University of Maryland. Mr. Lewis, thank you so much for joining me here today at the Roundtable.
Absolutely, Noah. Thanks for having me.
Of course, let's jump into it. You're an extremely active and experienced expert witness. Tell me about your two LLCs that you own.
I started my first one, Valley Automotive Consulting, in 2001. I was actually an in-house expert at a Philadelphia law firm that specialized in lemon law and dealer fraud cases in the automotive world. We also branched out, and because of my background, started investigating these interesting title washing and things like those cases that were very almost criminal. And I was part of several class action lawsuits. In 2008, because I've been a commercial driver of sorts since 1987, I started Total Transportation Training. The initial intention was just to go in and do mock DOT audits on small trucking companies and towing companies, make sure they were compliant with all the rules and regulations, and then offer training to their office personnel, their safety personnel, and their drivers. And then just naturally transferred right into expert witness work, investigating truck crashes for both defense and plaintiffs' sources.
Now, you say you transferred naturally. How did you first become an expert witness? Tell me a little bit about that.
I was a service manager. Unfortunately, that dealer group got in a lot of trouble, basically buying wrecked cars at auction and fixing them up and selling them without disclosure. Well, I ended up getting fired in the process because I argued with the GM saying that what we're doing is not right here. And the law firm that was handling this class action lawsuit actually contacted me, and it looked me up and contacted me, and we talked, and I went to work for them. I'd never done any kind of expert witness work. And basically the attorneys there kind of walked me through everything I needed to do. It was a rough start. It really was. And then I was just handed an incredible volume of cases and off to the races.
What were the rough patches, and how would you advise newer expert witnesses to avoid those sorts of caveats?
Well, there's three things. First off, I had no idea what I was doing. I was talking to attorneys that spoke really fast and didn't make any sense because I didn't understand what they were saying. And I was kind of thrown to the wolves, and you had to do what you had to do. Because of that, because of my lack of training and understanding, it was tough. It was really tough. When I first started testifying, and the attorneys for the defense for these car manufacturers were trying to belittle me on the stand or really dig in deep on some of their questions, it made me mad because I thought they were just trying to put me out of a job and disqualify me. Ironically, after the first couple of trials that I went through, I was shocked that the attorneys that I worked with wanted to have lunch with these guys. So then it took me a while to realize they're just doing their job. Their job as a defense attorney for a car manufacturer is to advocate for their client. And no matter what area of expertise you choose to work as an expert, you have to understand that. They're going to ask the tough questions, and as long as you're ready to answer them, you got to be. The other area was social media. I'm ADHD and OCD. I love to talk to people. I had no experience in this, but at the same time, I became a host on the Edmunds.com town hall. There were about 10 of us that hosted. And I started posting stuff about all the cases I was seeing, and I made some comments on Edmunds.com, and I guess I didn't realize that the internet is forever, which shows as an expert witness, you're not unbiased, which is huge. It's incredibly important. You really have to, two things. First, you have to have an attitude like a baseball umpire. You have to sit behind the home plate and call balls and strikes and not take either side. You have to be fair. If you're not willing to be fair, the other side of that is whatever you say sticks with you forever. And if you're perceived as unfair, or biased, the ugliest word in the expert witness vocabulary is being excluded. And if you're excluded on part or whole of a testimony or case, it will follow you forever, and there's no way to fix it. So it can happen very early in your career, and it can make for a very short career, unfortunately.
When you say it can follow you forever, how does that happen? What are the mechanics of that?
Well, every attorney has access to find law and those sources like that. And and of course now, 2001, Google wasn't a big deal. Now it is.
Sure.
You can look me up in any source, and you can find all the books I've written, the articles I've written. You can find pictures of me singing karaoke in New Mexico. You can see my new motorcycle that's on my social media account. You can see all that stuff. The problem is you can also see if I'd ever been excluded in a trial, an arbitration, or anything like that. And if you're excluded, unfortunately, you're damaged goods. And that's just a fact of life.
Let's dig into social media a little bit. What are the do's and don'ts of social media for expert witnesses?
Put up pictures of your kids and your dog. Stay away from all of the controversial stuff that will alienate people and impact your bias, because they'll make a story out of it. And there's a ruling that social media can't be used to harm or exclude an expert witness. But the point is, like Mr. Miyagi said, you're either karate yes or karate no. Karate maybe squish like grape. Don't take the chance.
When you first get a call from a prospective client, what are the sorts of things that you like to address with them? How do you vet a client? How do they vet you? What are the things that you're looking for and the things that they're looking for when you are addressing a potential engagement?
I know the attorney is looking at qualifications and credibility. I mean, those are the two big pillars of any expert witness.
What do you mean by credibility?
Just like the social media thing. And I'll tell you a very, very quick story. A gentleman in California, I was talking with a defense attorney in California that I was working on a case, and this gentleman's name came up in the documents that the attorney had sent me. And I noticed that this gentleman was designated as an expert in the case, but I never saw an expert report. I never saw that he was deposed. I never saw anything from him. And he was supposedly on the same side as me. And I just thought it was weird because we're both transportation safety guys. So I asked the attorney, I'm like, hey, what's up with this guy? He goes, he goes, you replaced him. I call that guy a jukebox expert. Jukebox expert, what is that? He goes, well, you put your quarters in and your favorite song comes out. I'm like, what? He goes, no, seriously. When it's well known in the community that if a lawyer can't get the expert to say what they want them to say, they call this guy. And my head exploded. I'm like, oh my God, I hope nobody ever says that about me, because that's horrible. To have that kind of reputation, you're done. You're done in the industry. And that's something that I vet attorneys on. When an attorney is overly pushy and overly aggressive and like, look, I know what happened in my case, and I want you to say this, this, and this. Sir, I'm going to stop you right there.
How do you avoid that sort of thing?
But I don't let them get there to begin with.
Sure.
I can tell immediately, I've called 3 people and nobody would do what I wanted them to do. I probably can't either, sir. You have a great day. And that's just something you learn from experience. But the point is, if they're pushy like that, they're pushy for a reason. They've got a horrible case and they want you to save their case. And an expert witness absolutely cannot save a case. They can bolster a case. They can reinforce it. They can't save it. So that's exactly where it comes from.
How often does something like that come up? How many cases have you had to turn down for moral reasons, because you couldn't take it because they were trying to push you to change what your expert opinion actually is?
I'll say this with a caveat: only a couple, because people don't call me knowing that I don't play like that, because they got the referral from another attorney and they probably said, yeah, don't try to push this guy around because it's not going to happen. He's an umpire. He's going to call balls and strikes. Because here's something a lot of people don't realize as an expert witness. And I'm not trying to get off our current subject, but your job as an expert witness is to cover the good, the bad, and the ugly for the attorney who retains you. They need to know, especially in my defense cases. I love working defense cases. I've got this one gentleman named John that we've done several cases together. He'll retain me. He'll send me all the docs and we'll talk a week later. And all right, give me the bad news. Well, that's exactly what he's looking for. Well, your guy violated his hours of service. He had a DUI 8 years ago. Now he's a commercial driver. That's a little weird. They need to know that stuff. They may not know it otherwise. And if you can investigate it and give that information to them, it helps them, because they're going to have to go back to their client and say, okay, the other side is requesting this level of money for this crash. Your guy's partly at fault, and he was driving outside of his hours of service. We're done. So we need to just go ahead and settle the case and get it done with. And that's the information an attorney needs to know, instead of dragging it out 6 months and coming to the same conclusion and spending all the time and money. That's where you can really help.
Let me ask you this: when you are first starting a case, say you've accepted the engagement, you don't have any major objections to it, do you put in any special terms in your contract?
My contract is very simple. I have a retainer. As soon as you sign it, my retainer is paid in full, and that is the work. Now, if my work goes over that amount, I'll bill additional. But here's the problem. Some attorneys want to pay a retainer and then get you to do an hour's worth of work and give them that heads up call, and then you're done. I'm not that guy. Don't be that guy. Don't be that girl. I'm not saying it's all about the money, but it is about the money, because I'm going to put 7 or 8 or 10 hours into that initial phone call, knowing that that's going to be part of the casework, and I'll bill for it ultimately down the road. That initial phone call tells you so much, though. You got to feel them out. You got to understand, okay, where are they coming from? One of the biggest things, what's the deadline? Now, I love to be Johnny on the spot for the quick deadlines. I really do, because I've got a couple of friends in the industry that will absolutely not touch a case unless they have 2 or 3 months to work on it. Okay. I need 2 days. I need 2 days. I need a week. I'll get it done. Because what expert witnesses don't understand about the system in a lot of areas, an attorney hopes to settle a case all the way up to the very end before they have to start designating expert witnesses. Well, now they're 30 days from the expert designation time, and they need to find somebody, and right now leads to another thing. But here's the thing. If you're not willing to do these quick cases, you're not going to provide much service for people, because they can find anybody to take 6 months to do a case, but they can't find anybody to do one in a week. And that's valuable, and people know it, and people like that, and they don't abuse me with it. Hey, this one's got 6 weeks. That's fantastic. This other one I'm giving you, because I'll give you 2 cases, I need next week. Not a problem. Let's get it done.
Let's dig into that a little bit. What are some of the challenges with those super, super short cases, and how do you handle it? How do you prepare for those? I need this in 1 day. I need this in 12 hours. How do you deal with that?
Well, there's several. This has a lot of moving parts to it, because I'll talk to the attorney, and he's not the managing partner or whatever at his firm, and that's fine. Not everybody is. And I'll say, okay, I'm going to retain you. I got a case deadline in 10 days. Okay, get me all the stuff. You tell me you're going to retain me, I'm going to start working without having to sign retainer and a check. I'm going to do it. Now, so you send me what you got with the complaint, the crash report, and 2 depositions and whatever. But I need the driver's qualification file. I handle mostly transportation cases. I need the DQ file, which is huge in our industry. And I need, the equipment information and the photos and all this stuff, right? Well, then I don't get a retainer check until 12 days past the initial call, which is past your deadline. And you didn't send me the rest of that information until the day before the deadline. That can be a huge problem, especially I might be in a deposition that day or in a trial or have another case for someone else that I have to knock out, so that's huge. People dragging their feet. If you're going to call me or anyone else and say, I dropped the ball, I got 10 days to fix it. Okay, just be prepared to do what you need to do to help me out, because I need all the documents right now, and I need to not worry about whether I'm going to send it, because I'm not going to send a report without a retainer. I've gotten burned, never going to happen again. I probably got 40 grand in fees that I'll never see again. And, that's money I could have spent on grandchildren's college, so it's a big deal.
So you've addressed one of the things that make a great attorney expert relationship. What What else? What are the things that make a super positive working relationship between the expert witness and the attorney in your experience?
Reliability and honesty. And that sounds awful cliche and basic, but that's really it. They call up and go, hey, I got this case. I don't know what you think about it. I just need to know, and you tell them, hey, this case is horrible because of this, and this. Here's what's going on. They actually love to hear that. They want to hear that. And I know a lot of experts don't want to give the bad news to the attorney. They need it. They have to have all the facts laid out on the table to have a decision on how to try their case or settle it or whatever they're doing with it. Because if they don't have that information, you're holding them, you're handcuffing them, and that's not cool. They're not going to like you for it, and they're not going to use you again.
Let's talk about expert witnessing more generally. What do you feel is meaningful? What do you feel that is important about being an expert witness in general?
There's two things I love about it. I love the strategy of it. I love strategizing with attorneys because I've done it so much and I've been questioned so many times. I know what the other side is going to say when I write this sentence this way.
When you say you write this sentence, are you talking about your expert report?
Right. In my expert report, I'm going to write a sentence a certain way. It's going to prompt a question from the other side. And there you go. The other thing is you're held to the four corners of your report in the sense that if you don't write about it, your attorney can't talk about it. They can ask you, but they can get an objection and the objection can be sustained and then you're stuck. So even if you think it may not even be important, put it in the report, that one little sentence. By the way, he might have been fatigued. Okay. Sure. Where'd that come from? Well, at least your attorney can ask you that question now. Because if you don't mention it, they're going to he can say a thing about this in his report, or he can't talk about that, and you can't. But reliability and honesty are there. It's a business relationship, and understand that. But at the same time, it's a very personal relationship because I have to give you all of the character and morals and everything that I've got in order to make this happen. Because once you sell out once or twice, and you bend your own rules, you've messed yourself up for a career.
How has the role changed over time? And I have a few different categories I'd like to ask you about. So how has the work itself changed? How have expectations from attorneys changed? And how have the logistics of getting things done changed?
Technology has helped a lot. It definitely has. If you want to be an expert and you're an older guy or girl and you're anti-technology, forget it. Mm-hmm. Everything is Dropbox, everything is a link, everything is a Microsoft link or something, So you got to be attuned to technology. You got to understand how to download your docs and all that. And not, my biggest thing was downloading videos. Sure. I figured it out. I messed around and I figured it out. I was lucky at my first law firm back in Pennsylvania. I sat next to the company's IT guy. And it was like going to a Microsoft class every day. It was great. Now, this was 2001, 2002, but still, sure, he taught me everything I need to know. And I still remember stuff to this day, 23 years later. The problem with that, with technology, especially with younger attorneys, they're used to having everything instantaneous. Unfortunately, I sent it to you. Have you reviewed it yet? Well, the internet did wonders, and they got that file to me in 12 seconds. But it still takes me an hour to read it. So understand how that works. That technology helps to a certain extent, but it doesn't take away from the actual human factor of reading, understanding, writing notes, all that. Speaking of notes, never keep notes. Never make notes, ever. That's one of my biggest rules. Do not make notes. Now, in California, if you've made any note, they don't want a report, by the way. They don't want an expert report because one's not required in most California cases. So I just started taking notes. I learned this 2 years ago, never do it again. I never took notes. And then it was like, well, for this one, I will. Well, then, and I exchanged my notes with the attorney. And he sent them in full with all of my highlights and different colors and scratch outs and bold and a few dumb comments like, why the heck is this guy doing that? It's in my notes because that's something I wanted to think about while I was writing. Problem is now, both sides have it. All 7 attorneys in this case have it. All the experts in this case have my notes. That's horrible. So I don't keep notes. And people, oh, sure you don't. No, I don't take notes. I don't. When you give me all your documents for your case and they're all there. They got 3 depositions. You got a crash report. You got a complaint. You got a driver qualification file. You got a couple other statements, some pictures. And I download everything. I list them in the resources that I reviewed for this report, and I open them and I start writing. And I don't open them and start writing until I'm ready to open them and start writing. And they go into my report, and there's no draft, there's no notes, there's nothing. There's a report. And when I'm done with it, I save it, I spell check it, and I send it. And there's no notes. What you're getting is the official formal production that I gave you. And there's no scratch outs, and there's no highlights, and there's no what the heck are you thinking? Even an old guy that's been doing it a long time can make a mistake like that. I did.
Let's talk about advertising and finding work. How do you find work? Has it changed throughout your career as an expert witness?
Well, I've had kind of a unique upbringing in that way. I wasn't an expert before I started with the firm in Philadelphia. They hired me, taught me how to do it, and I worked there for 8 years. I went back in the trucking industry and started my own training group, which is Total Transportation Training. And I worked in the trucking industry. Actually, my wife and I had this big RV, and I would travel around and I would do audits and training, and the income was okay, and it worked fine. I became a terminal manager in the trucking industry, and through that time, through 2008 to 2015, 16, I was doing 15 or 20 cases a year. That's about it. And the majority of those were through Roundtable, Thomson Reuters. I've also done some for a couple of other expert witness groups, consortiums. And it's just that's all I did. And I worked a regular job, and I did this on the side. Well, 2 years ago, ESI approached me, and I'm on my 175th case in under 2 years. I don't do anything with advertising. That's the ultimate. I guess I just stumbled in the ultimate situation. It's great. I've got a farm. I work from home. We're all remote employees. We travel for work, trials, or whatever we have to. I'm going to the DRI conference in St. Louis next month. It's going to be great. But here's the thing is that if you're not doing that and you're on your own, the only way you're going to become known, it's the old advertisement. Do you remember the Navy used to have an advertisement? We don't ask for experience, we give it. And the young man was like, well, how can I get a job if I don't have experience? That's the catch-22 at this work. If you haven't already been established, you're not going to get established just throwing your sign on the wall and getting some business cards. You have to have been established one way or the other. And the way to get established, though, it leads to the amount of marketing and advertisement you would need. For instance, if you're a safety guy at a big company, whether it's OSHA or trucking or whatever, and you ask your corporate counsel if you could be your internal expert witness on cases involving your company, that's perfect. That's a perfect way to start. Be the expert that you are in your management career field. Go to your corporate counsel, become the internal expert, save your company money on experts, and do that level of work and get established. And there's a good chance you'll never have to advertise. I haven't ever paid for a dime of advertising. I don't have a Facebook page for it. I don't have a website, nothing. I just don't need to.
On the topic of changing work among expert witnesses, have you noticed that more cases are going to settlement rather than to trial?
Well, sure, but that's okay. To me, I love going to trial. I like travel, but once I get there and I'm traveling, I'm like, man, I just want to go home. However, the goal of your attorney is to resolve the case, however that may be.
Sure.
And it's much easier for them to settle it than it is to take it to trial.
Does your work fundamentally change when something goes to settlement, or do you always prepare as though your case will probably go to trial?
Well, that's just it. My reports are not written for an attorney. Every report I write for the sole purpose, ever since my first time, was what if I were on the jury and we listened to all the stuff and then we went back in the room, give me something to read that makes sense so I can help the jury. Because if I'm going to be the jury foreman, I write these reports for the jury foreman. If I'm going to be the jury foreman and you're on the jury with me, I'm like, look, this guy said this, this, and this, and this. This makes sense. I think he's wrong here, but the rest of this thing is okay. I disagree with something. Whatever, doesn't matter. My point is that I write my reports for the jury because ultimately I expect every case to go to trial when only 2%, 3% actually go. in my world anyway.
Has that increased throughout your career?
Yes, but I think it's because of the nature of the cases I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with multi-million-dollar personal injury cases involving trucking companies now. They're huge, but they settle. They really do. When I started, I was dealing with lemon law cases, and Pennsylvania has a very unique court system in their court of common pleas. They have a fast track for cases under $100,000. At least back in the days, 100,000. They probably raised that. Basically, if you got a car that has problems and you call a firm, within 30 days, all the discovery's done and the complaint's filed, discovery's done. Within 60 days, depositions have been taken. And in 90 days, you're sitting in an arbitration in downtown Philly, because they had their own little court system where all the attorneys had to serve on these arbitration boards. I've been involved in as many as 6 in one day. And they're like mini trials. You got 3 attorneys sitting in a panel. You got the plaintiffs, you got the defense. They put it on just like it was a regular judge and jury, but there's no judge and jury. There's 3 experienced attorneys. They present their case. The attorneys make their decision. They got to be 2 out of 3 to make a proper decision, and it's done. And then your attorney's waiting till the end of the day till they got the little card file to figure out who won or lost and how much. And that was very unique. All of those cases went to arbitration because it cost $219 to file it and go to arbitration. So with that cost to the attorney, why in the world would you settle it when you got a better chance of winning at arbitration? And the next step, by the way, you'll have a trial within 60 days or so if it fails at arbitration. You can't lose. But now when you're dealing with a 3/4 ton truck and a Cadillac, you got a $2 million insurance policy, and I guarantee they're well over $100,000 in expert fees and witnesses and depositions going into the trial.
Let's shift to the future. How do you see the job of the expert witness evolving in the courtroom? How are the expectations changing? How are the logistics changing? What do you see as the future of expert witnessing?
Well, the one area that really has changed monumentally and is going to change even more is accident reconstruction. I went to 2 different accident recon schools when I was in the Air Force as a cop. The Department of Defense puts on these accident reconstruction schools. And I love math, I love physics, and they give you the examples, and all the formulas to figure out how deep the skid marks are, how much rubber got transposed to the road, how long they are. And based on that, you can determine the vehicle speed, velocity, blah, 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 right? Nobody does that anymore. They use a drone, and they use these high-mounted cameras, and the guy goes, I've seen it. The guy's sitting in his pickup truck with drone controls, and he's mapping out the whole scene. And then he goes back to his office and he does calculations, and that's it. So that field has changed drastically with technology, but you still have to have the basic education and certifications to do that job. So technology's changed a lot for a lot of people. It really hasn't changed much on the transportation side, except now we have things like electronic logs that can either be falsified or not falsified, edited or not edited. You can do a download on a vehicle that you could not do 96 and below on any vehicle 96 and below, or any truck 99 and below. Now you can. So this guy, I hit my brakes. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Well, I was only going 42 miles an hour. No, you're going 58. We got it right here at 1806.22 seconds. You were going 58 miles an hour. And social media, people running their phone as a dash cam. Just in your personal car, you witness a crash. That crash is now on TikTok or YouTube. Yeah. So attorneys really have to be aware of that. Experts have to be aware of that. You got some guy out there with some TikTok handle that's saying, hey, man, you ain't gonna believe this truck wreck I saw. Whoa, he might hurt or help your case.
Do you have any cases that kind of stand out as influencing the way that you approach expert witnessing, or, inform the way that you do your job in kind of a fundamental way?
Well, one thing it's helped me as an expert, but it helped me more as a DOT compliance guy and a training guy, and putting people's feet to the fire on documenting training. An old gentleman, 74 years old, and I'll preface this with, this old guy had 144 acres in Mississippi outside Jackson. He had 2 homes on the property, couple of pickups, a car. He had a home for his daughter and her husband. Had a tractor, had all this cool stuff. And of course, at this time in his life, everything's paid for, everything's great. He worked for a tow company, and he was driving the same Dodge W400 medium duty tow truck that he was back in 1974 when it was bought new. It didn't have a straight body panel on it. All the glass was broke. There were holes in the floor. The thing hadn't seen maintenance in 20 years. It had a single line. Have you seen the sling type tow trucks? This was a single. This wasn't a dual line. This was a single line tow truck with a hook, and he slung towed. His job was hauling wrecked cars to the scrapyard. This one weekend, though, he was covering their medium and heavy guys. He was, he normally didn't work on call time, but for whatever reason, the two guys that normally ran their medium and heavy unit had to be out of town or something. So he got a call to tow a U-Haul truck, a loaded Mom's Attic 26-foot U-Haul truck, and it had broken down. So he goes out. Now, U-Haul prohibits sling towing because it involves the front bumper and all that, and they don't want, sling towing is way outdated. It just doesn't exist anymore.
Sure.
But he went out and he slung this truck, and he's going down the road, and he hit a bump in the road on I-20, one of the little bridge seams. His cable snapped, so the entire sling came off the truck. The U-Haul went one way, the tow truck went the other way. The sling ended up laying in the middle of the road at 11 o'clock at night. Nobody could see it. You got this big metal monstrosity sitting out there in the middle of the road, and a lady in an Oldsmobile Aurora hit it, rolled her car 7 times side over side, almost killed her. So when it all came down to it, the towing company was saved in this litigation, because what they did is twice a year, they had you clean up your truck or whatever and present your truck to the other 10 or 12 people working in the company and say, look, if you ever have to jump in my truck for something, here's where this lever is, here's where the broom is, here's where this is. And they showed them how it worked and all this. And the company owner documented that training. Very smart to do. Cross training.
Sure.
Great thing. So the light duty guy, if he had to jump in a medium duty truck and take it out for somebody else to use, he could do it, right? Now, nobody wanted an old John's truck because it was stunk, it was nasty, it was beat up. But John took that training too. But because he took that training, he had the choice of taking the medium duty International or the heavy duty Kenworth out on that U-Haul tow, but he refused. And because of that, he was hung as the sole civil litigant in the trial. And $1.2 million later, he lost his entire farm. You got to understand, the training documentation is there for a reason. Take care of your business and make it easy for the experts and the attorneys to help you. People understand that as an employee of a company, you've got no protections. The boss does. He's got an LLC or an incorporation. If the building catches fire and he loses his business or all the trucks inside, he still keeps his house and his boat. But you as an individual employee, if you make a mistake, you don't have that protection. And I've written a lot of articles based on that one case, about 15 different articles about how to protect yourself. That really changed the way I look at these cases too, because I got emotionally involved in that. I sat in on the guy's deposition as this old guy cried. Like, wow, So you can't help but be touched by some of these cases. But on the other hand, you can't let it change your outcome. You can't let how bad you feel for old John sway what you write and what you do, because what you write and what you do is going to stick with you for the next 30 years.
Let's talk a little bit about the relationship that you have with other expert witnesses. Have you worked on teams or on actions where the attorney employs multiple experts in different areas? So you might have a technical expert and a damages expert, et cetera. Have you worked in teams like that?
Absolutely. And I've only been doing that for about the past 15 years, and more so about the past 7 or 8 years, right alongside a human factors expert, an accident recon person, because I don't have a drone. I'm not an accident recon guy anymore. I don't have the drone and the cool camera. I'm not going to spend the money. It's very common to have experts team together, and we talk. And in fact, I just did an inspection just before Christmas in Las Vegas, on a defense case involving a trucking company. And I went out with the human factors person, a young lady, and the accident recon guy, and we did an inspection of this truck that had been involved in a crash. Now, it wasn't damaged bad. Basically, a lady on a scooter ran into the side of the truck as he was making a right turn. But I wanted to prove from a transportation perspective that all 5 of the turn signals on this side of this truck were visible. And I took video and pictures saying, you can't miss this. It's a blue and white truck with red stuff on it and all these signals. Well, then the accident recon guy had to do his measurements based on that. And then the human factors lady, I was helping her because I was actually pushing the scooter alongside as she was sitting in the truck looking in the mirrors to visually understand how far back this driver might have seen this scooter operate. Things like that. Very, very cool to work with. I'll preface this with, there's a lot of work you do adverse to other experts. And some experts aren't ready for that. They're going to come out guns ablaze and they're going to say, I disagree. This guy's an idiot. I've been called a casual observer. I've been called uninformed. I've been called a hired gun. And that's why I do 50% plaintiff and 50% defense now. That is very important to me. And I'll tell any expert to go that route if at all possible.
Let's sidebar on that. I want to hear a little bit about that. What is the difference between working plaintiff and defendant side?
Well, there's really not that many differences, except, you're looking at the evidence that your attorney presents you that favors the case for the plaintiff or favors the case for the defense. For instance, I can look at the same case and I could probably work both sides of it. Say, look, the truck driver was correct in his logs. He had gotten sleep. His truck was clean. It passed inspection. He didn't do anything wrong. He was there right in his lane and whatever. But the downside to that is in his driver qualification file, they didn't document a road test and training. So in theory, he's not qualified to drive. He did everything else right, but he shouldn't have been there. So on the plaintiff's side, I'm going to go, wait a minute. Yeah, he was in his lane. Yeah, his logs were good, but he shouldn't have been there because he wasn't qualified to drive. So that's the big deal there. Where I was going to begin with, though, the hired gun thing, you never want to be called a hired gun. And that's the layperson's understanding of what an expert does. Oh, you just say whatever the person who pays you wants you to say. You're not going to last very long if you do that.
Your duty is to the truth, right? Not to the client. It's to the truth of the matter.
Right, exactly. Even if it hurts your client, even if it hurts the attorney, tell them the truth. You got to say, hey, I found these problems. In fact, my guy in Vegas that I've done a bunch of cases for, he always starts off the call after that week or two of me reviewing. All right, give me the bad news. And I'll give him a checklist. Here's what I found. Dang, 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 And okay, well, thanks. And he calls a week later. We settle the case. Thank you. I gave him what he needed. He needed the bad news. If you only do plaintiff's cases, if you only do defense work, that can be a problem. I just told folks to get started, work inside your company. If you're a safety manager, work inside your company with your corporate counsel. Problem is, you're only going to do defense cases. You're not going to do any plaintiff's cases for your corporate counsel. It's not going to happen. But branch out a little bit. Get a referral from your corporate counsel to work for an attorney who might be a plaintiff's attorney and work that side of it with your knowledge you gained on your job. Because
do you think it's important to remain engaged in your profession while doing expert work?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, that's what, and that's a whole different subject in the sense that I've gotten 2 guys disqualified recently because of that. And I made the point to the attorney. She was a young lady. She was brand new, got thrown into this case. And sometimes you got to kind of give them a crutch and help them along and say, okay, in the deposition, ask me this because I need to talk about this. This is important. But at the same time, she goes, well, what do you think about this expert who's a guy in Texas here? And I pointed it out to her that in his CV, he was an expert in transportation, blah, blah, blah. And an accident recon guy. He knows how to study skid marks, he said, but he had no accident recon training. He never went to a truck driving school, which is neither here nor there, but he hadn't operated a truck for pay since 1986. Now that's monumental in the transportation industry, because FMCSA didn't exist in 1986. DOT did not exist in 1986. So how are you an expert on current transportation issues when you've never worked under this system 30 years ago? And she was like, wow. I'm like, look at this. The Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC, done away with in 1995 when the FMCSA was born. The Department of Transportation, the DOT as it exists today, did not exist until January 1st, 2000. So if you got an expert that's a transportation guy and he hasn't operated a truck or trained anyone who has since 1986, how are you going to be qualified to give opinions on things happening right now today on electronic logs? He's never used electronic logs. They didn't have them back in the day. In fact, the FMCSA hours of service rules have changed 100% since even 1990, 2000. The new system that's going right now didn't come about until 2005. So if you haven't operated since 2005, you haven't operated under the system. If you haven't operated since 2013, you haven't used electronic logs, unless you work for Werner. It's a different story. They've had electronic logs forever. I wrote an article on this. Do expert witnesses have a shelf life? Absolutely. That's why I maintain a current CDL and medical card. And that's why once a month I drive for my neighbor who has a log truck, and I engage in interstate commerce, moving logs from North Texas over the state line into Oklahoma.
Is it simply to maintain your certifications, or are you constantly learning? Are you improving? What does it mean to be an expert in your field? Are you constantly absorbing new stuff? Are you getting the new laws? Tell me about it.
You really have to, and that's I don't drive this truck once a month to talk to the guys at the log place, where we drop them off. No offense to them, they're nice people, but I do it to stay current. And when I'm questioned, when was the last time you drove a truck? 2 weeks ago. You can't argue with that. But more importantly, operating under these systems, being inspected by state troopers, both in Oklahoma and Texas, I'm subjected to now current day rules and regulations. So I have to know them. And if you don't know them like the back of your hand, you shouldn't be playing this game.
Let's back up to where we were talking about working on teams of different types of experts. What is the coordination like? Do they simply exist side by side, or are you working with different experts to kind of come together with a plan for the attorney, or come together with an expert report for the attorney? What's that collaboration like?
That is really up to the attorney that I've found.
Okay.
And I've done it both ways. Some of the attorneys I've done a lot of work for, like this one guy in Denver, I've done 6 or 7 cases for him. He says, hey, that accident recon guy, Tom, yeah, he just did his report. I want you guys to talk before you do yours. Okay, cool. That makes sense. I'm going to talk to Tom directly because he was out there doing his drone thing, and I'm going to get all his information and see how that compares to the notes that I've made or the report that I've made on the information that I have. And he always shows me something else. And then I usually show him something that he didn't think about. And that works perfectly, works really well together. Same with human factors, same concept. There are attorneys, though, that don't care that you do that, don't want you to do that necessarily. But what they will do is, 2 weeks before your deposition or a trial or whatever, they'll say, hey, I got an accident recon report. I got this guy involved, and I want you to check out his report and see if you need to rebut anything on it or support anything on it. And usually his report supports mine, and we haven't even talked. Based on Mr. Smith's findings, I agree with him, and that supports my position on this, that the driver was in violation of whatever. There you go. And that's how we should work together. There's an adversarial feeling in the industry, and there are a handful of people that I can name. Of course I won't. A handful of people that I've worked with or worked against, that they're in it for the money. They don't have recent qualifications, and they write these 40-page reports where 39 and a half pages of it is just bloviation of spouting off regulations and stuff that don't even matter. And they give 3 sentences worth of opinions, and that's their report. And I guess they get paid by the word. Be brief and concise. Now, there's a lot of stuff in this industry when you write, you have to be technical. You have to explain your theory. Some work doesn't have theories involved, like digital forensics. Got a world of respect for the digital folks, but it's cut and dry. The phone was activated this time. A call lasted for 11 minutes. There's no theory involved in it. That's just a fact. In our world, there's a theory involved with like industry standards, where it's an industry standard. When somebody's pulled over on the side of the road, most truckers will put on their signal, and if there's room, they'll get over and give you a lane.
Mm-hmm.
That was long before this slow down, move over rule. That's been going on for 100 years. That's an industry standard. So then the other side wants to argue about how strong it is. Well, it's just an industry standard. It's not a law. Come on, I hear that. Anyway, I digress on that. But working with the other experts is what ties that stuff together. Because I've taken human factors and accident recon experts and say, hey, we have an industry standard that here's what we do. Not in the regulations anywhere. It's an unwritten standard, but this is the way we do it. So take that into consideration when you start writing. And they do.
Have you worked across different venues, for example, state, federal, regulatory, international, et cetera? And if so, are there differences in that sort of work, or do you approach it largely in the same manner?
I really approach it the same, but I've testified in federal, state court, county court. I haven't done any regulatory work directly. I've got a really weird case going on in Michigan that involves chemicals, where that part of the case is resolved now. There's a secondary part, the contracts issue, but basically, he dealt in distilled alcohols, and he sold them for people to make liquor out of distilled alcohols. That was his gig, and he made good money doing it, large volume. Well, he got one shipment that actually was alcohols used to clean out the bays of barges, as disgusting as that sounds. And what they use to clean out the barges is methanol. Methanol is fatal to people. He ended up with a shipment of partial 40% methanol. And because of that, 7 people died. Now, they brought me in as a trucking expert. And I'm like, what am I doing here? Well, you got a hazmat license, right? I'm like, yeah. Okay. How should this load have been placarded by the trucking company that transported from point A to point B? I'm like, ooh, yeah, now that's how I'm involved. So basically I looked at it, and because when you would transport chemicals as a driver, you get a breakdown of what you got. It's usually only one type of chemical, whether it's gasoline, diesel, or sulfuric acid, whatever it is. You get a report, a lab report saying this is 98% sulfuric acid, whatever it is. Because of that, then you look in your book, and it's up to the shipper, of course, to give you the placards for your truck. You as a driver make sure it's placarded correctly. You got the bills of lading and the thing in case anything happens, the police can get right to the bills. And you have your little hazmat book open to the page where that placard belongs, and all that. There's rules for that. Well, the problem is it was falsified. So the shipping company falsified the documents as to what it was, because they knew it was garbage, and it was mostly methanol. They sold it to this guy anyway. So it was transported incorrectly. So that tied in the trucking company and the driver. And it turned into a mess.
Wow. You alluded to this a little bit earlier, but what are the factors, in your opinion, that make for a positive attorney-expert relationship? What are the things that you're looking for, and what are the things that they're looking for that really helps you guys kind of click and work together well?
Don't be vague. I know that sounds silly, but don't be vague. If you cannot be 100% positive, either don't write it or talk to them about, hey, here's what I got. Here's what I want to say. And I don't want to be weak, because your attorney needs several things from you. They need you to be as concise as possible. They need you to be correct, because they don't want anything blowing up in their face. And what I mean by that is, if you spout, don't do the expert creep thing. Stick to your area and don't creep out of it and say, well, I know about meteorology too, Oh yeah, well, you've watched a weather forecast, so I guess that makes us all meteorologists. But don't pretend to be something you're not, because if you do, your attorney may not know whether you have those qualifications or not, or maybe you did go to college to be a meteorologist. Point is, when you get in deposition or trial and start getting cross-examined, you're going to get messed up, and your attorney's going to be left holding the bag, and he'll never use you again. You don't put an attorney in that position. Be straight, be solid, and be strong. If you can't be strong, don't take the case.
And what should the attorneys be doing on their side?
Well, they should really check you out. I mean, word of mouth is the best advertising. And I've got a firm here in Texas that I've I started with this one young lady. She's sharp as a tack. In fact, that's who we had the trial with in San Antonio. But she's referred me to 22 of her coworkers. They got a lot of attorneys. And it just, yeah, hey, I hear you're the guy. Here's what I got. What do you think? And they'll run it past me. Well, yeah, it sounds right because this and this. All right, we're going to use you. Good, we're on. And my admin assistant out in California is like, another one? Yep, write it up. It works out.
Have you had any bad experiences or negative experiences that have kind of informed the way that you work as an expert witness that, that would be helpful as a lesson for newer expert witnesses?
As an expert, you are not a bill collector. Don't try to be a bill collector. Make the retainer work. Don't do any work until you got the retainer. Now, for some people that I've done multiple cases with, of course, that's a different story. But a new person, and I'm not saying you can't trust them. It's not a matter of that. This is your money, though. You're going to go do a bunch of work and might not get paid for it. Don't take that chance. Okay? Do what you got to do. No offense. Hey, you know what? That attorney, when they signed a retainer agreement with their client, they're either doing it on contingency or they took a retainer, one or the other. They're not working for free unless it's pro bono for some public case. I mean, I know people do that, but my point is being they're not working for free. They don't expect you to work for free. So the bad experiences I've had are twofold. One was a firm out in Florida that wanted me to go direct to these people who have had wrecks in their truck and their trucks are down. And they want me to collect a retainer and or initial fee from them, from their client. No, I did it a couple of times. The other side is when you get too good a relationship and you get an attorney like one I have, but after the second case, he starts calling me at 9:30 on a Sunday night. Hey man, I got a new case to run past you. You've got to be careful about the limitations. And I'm not saying be a jerk. Don't you dare call me, but 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. No, I've never had to lay that rule out. First case we did, I got a retainer. The second one, he goes, hey, I got another case for you. In fact, I got 2 more. And he gave me 3 cases. I didn't do a retainer agreement with it. And I didn't think about it. It wasn't that big a deal. And then, I did the work and I sent him my invoice and 30 days passed and then 60 days passed. And I'm sending him monthly reminders and that went 120 days. I'm like, you got to treat me right. You got to catch all these invoices up or lose my number. To a new expert, don't put yourself in that position. Set yourself up to be successful.
Before we wrap up, do you have any other last advice besides that for newer expert witnesses?
Well, again, watch what you do on social media. I don't care how active you are in politics or activism or culture, sexuality, any of the hot button topics that we have in our country today. Keep them off your social media. Participate in your parade. Be an activist. Whatever you know. Just don't let it end up on social media. And I use LinkedIn. I do nothing on LinkedIn that's remotely controversial. When defense counsel brings that up in front of the jury and go, this is the guy you're dealing with right here. Is this the kind of guy that has a rational judgment to look at something with balance and non-bias and help us make a decision in this case? I don't think so. And that's what it boils down to right there. Keep yourself credible.
Sage advice. Mr. Lewis, thank you so much for joining me here today at the Roundtable.
Absolutely. Had a good time.
And thank you to our listeners for joining me for another discussion at the Roundtable. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Discussions at Roundtable. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com. Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts or your favorite listening apps.